Sarah Chen always sat in the same spot, back row, corner seat, right next to the window. She liked it there because she could see the old oak tree outside, and nobody really noticed her. The music theory classroom was always full of students who talked loudly about their piano lessons and violin practice. Sarah just listened and took notes. Every morning at 9 o'clock, she walked into Professor Williams' class with her old backpack and worn notebook. The notebook was filled with her careful handwriting. She wrote down everything the professor said about music. She drew the notes perfectly. She understood how chords worked together, but she never raised her hand to answer questions. The other students in the class were different from Sarah. Most of them came from families with money. They talked about their private music teachers and expensive instruments at home. Lisa had a grand piano in her living room. Michael's parents bought him a new violin that cost more than Sarah's family made in 3 months. These students wore nice clothes and carried expensive bags. Sarah wore the same 3 sweaters all winter. Her jeans had small holes that she tried to hide. Her backpack was from high school, and the zipper was broken. She fixed it with a safety pin, but none of this mattered to her as much as the music did. When Professor Williams played examples on the piano at the front of the room, Sarah closed her eyes. She could hear every note in her mind. She could feel how the music moved and changed. Sometimes her fingers moved slightly on her desk, like she was playing along, but she always stopped herself when she noticed. After class, Sarah usually walked quickly to the library. She did not stay to talk with other students. They seemed nice enough, but they lived in a different world. They talked about concerts their parents took them to see. They mentioned famous musicians like they knew them personally. Sarah had never been to a real concert. She learned about famous musicians from books and videos on the library computers.in. The library, Sarah had a favorite spot on the 3rd floor. It was quiet there, and she could study without anyone bothering her. She read books about music history and composer biographies. She knew more about Chopin and Mozart than most of the performance students. But knowing about music and playing music were 2 different things. At least that is what everyone believed. Sarah's professors thought she was a good student, but nothing special. She got good grades on her written tests. She could analyze a piece of music and write about it clearly, but they never heard her play anything. In their minds, she was just another theory student who probably could not perform very well. Professor Williams often looked at Sarah during class. He wondered why she seemed so interested in music, but never participated in the performance side. He thought maybe she was shy, or maybe she just was not very talented at playing. Many students loved music, but could not play it well. He assumed Sarah was one of them. The music building was old and had practice rooms in the basement. Most students used the main practice rooms on the 1st and 2nd floors during the day. These rooms had windows and good lighting. The basement rooms were darker and older. Some of the pianos down there were out of tune. Most students avoided practicing there, but Sarah knew those basement rooms well. Every evening after dinner, when most students were in their dorms or at parties, Sarah went to the music building. She had a key because she worked part-time cleaning the building. It was not a good job, but it paid a little money and gave her access to the building at night. The night janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, was kind to Sarah. He saw her there almost every night, but never asked questions. He knew she was a music student and figured she just needed extra time to study. Sometimes he brought her coffee from the vending machine. They would nod to each other in the hallways, but they did not talk much. Sarah's evening routine was always the same. She finished her other homework first. Then around 9 o'clock, she took the stairs down to the basement. She chose the practice room at the end of the hall because it was the most private. The piano in that room was old, but it stayed in tune better than the others. She always checked to make sure no one else was around before she started. Then she sat at the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys. This was when Sarah became a different person. Her shy, quiet personality disappeared. Her fingers moved across the keys like they belonged there. Sarah had been playing piano since she was 4 years old. Her grandmother taught her in China before the family moved to America. Grandma Mai had been a concert pianist many years ago. She gave up her career when she got married, but she never stopped loving music. When Sarah's family came to America, they could not bring the piano. They could barely afford the plane tickets. Sarah's parents worked long hours at jobs that paid very little. They wanted Sarah to study something practical that would help her get a good job. Music seemed like a dream that poor families could not afford. But Grandma Mai made Sarah promise to keep playing. Before she died 2 years ago, she made Sarah swear that she would not give up music completely. Sarah kept that promise by playing. Alone in the basement practice rooms, the music that came from Sarah's fingers was beautiful. She played pieces by Chopin, Debussy, and Rachmaninoff. These were not easy pieces. They required years of training and natural talent. Sarah had both, but nobody at the university knew it. Sometimes when Sarah played, she cried. The music reminded her of her grandmother. It reminded her of the small apartment where they practiced together every day after school. Grandma Mai would sit next to her on the piano bench and guide her hands. She taught Sarah that music was not just about the notes. It was about feelings and stories and memories. Now, Sarah played those same pieces alone in the dark basement. She played them perfectly, but no one heard them except the old walls and empty hallways. She was hiding her greatest talent because she was afraid. Afraid that people would expect things from her that she could not give them. Afraid that being good at music would not be enough if she could not afford the lessons and competitions that other students had. So Sarah stayed quiet in class. She wrote in her notebook and listened to others talk about their musical lives. She was the invisible student who understood music better than most, but seemed to have no talent for playing it. At least, that is what everyone thought. It was a cold Tuesday morning in October when Professor Williams walked into the classroom with a serious look on his face. Sarah noticed right away that something was different. Usually he started class by playing a piece of music or telling a story about a famous composer. Today, he went straight to his desk and pulled out a stack of papers. The students in the room were talking quietly among themselves. Lisa was showing Michael pictures on her phone from a concert she went to over the weekend. 2 other students were discussing their upcoming piano recitals. Sarah sat in her usual corner seat, watching the professor organize his papers. Professor Williams cleared his throat loudly. The room became quiet. He looked around at all the students, his eyes stopping for a moment on each face. Sarah felt nervous when his eyes met hers, though she did not know why. "I have an announcement to make," Professor Williams said in a voice that sounded more serious than usual. "The music department has decided to make some changes to our program requirements." Sarah opened her notebook and got ready to write down whatever he was going to say. She always took careful notes, even for announcements. "Starting this semester, all music majors will be required to participate in our end-of-semester showcase." The professor continued. "This means every single student in this program, no matter what your focus area is, must perform a solo piece in front of the department faculty and invited guests." The room erupted in excited chatter. Most of the students seemed happy about this news. They were performance majors who loved being on stage. For them, this was just another chance to show off their skills. But Sarah felt her stomach drop. She gripped her pen tighter and stared down at her notebook. This was exactly the kind of thing she had been trying to avoid by focusing on music theory instead of performance. "Professor Williams," Lisa raised her hand. "What kind of pieces are we supposed to play? Can we choose our own?" "Good question," he replied. "The faculty will assign each student a piece that we feel matches their current skill level and will challenge them appropriately. We want to see growth and effort, not just technical perfection." Raised his hand next. "What if someone is not really a performer? What if they are more focused on theory or composition?" Professor Williams smiled, but it was not a warm smile. "Music is meant to be played, not just studied on paper. Every musician should be able to perform, even if it is not their main strength. This requirement will help all of you become more well-rounded musicians." Sarah felt like the room was spinning. She had worked so hard to avoid performance classes. She chose music theory specifically because she thought she could learn about music without having to play in front of people. Now, that plan was falling apart. After class, Sarah gathered her things slowly. She hoped that if she waited long enough, everyone else would leave, and she could talk to Professor Williams privately. Maybe she could convince him to let her write an extra research paper instead of performing. When the room was finally empty except for her and the professor, Sarah walked up to his desk. Her heart was beating fast and her hands were shaking a little. "Professor Williams," she said quietly, "I was hoping I could talk to you about the performance requirement." He looked up from the papers he was grading. "Of course, Sarah. What questions do you have?" "Well, I was wondering if there might be an alternative assignment for students who are focused on theory rather than performance. Maybe I could write an analysis paper or do a research project instead." Professor Williams sat down his pen and looked at Sarah with the expression that was not unkind, but was definitely firm. "Sarah, you are a music major. Music is not just about reading and writing. It is about sound and performance and connecting with an audience. You cannot truly understand music if you never play it." "But I am not really a performer," Sarah said, her voice getting quieter. "I do not think I would be very good at it. I might embarrass myself and the department." "That is exactly why you need to do this," the professor replied. "You have been hiding behind books and papers for 2 years. It is time to step out of your comfort zone. I have seen your written work. You understand music theory better than most students. But understanding and doing are two different things." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she tried to keep them from falling. "Is there really no way I can be excused from this requirement?" Professor Williams shook his head. "No exceptions. Every music major performs in the showcase. That is final." He reached into a folder on his desk and pulled out a sheet of music. Sarah could see the title even from where she was standing: Ballade Number 1 in G minor by Frédéric Chopin. "This is your assigned piece," he said, handing her the music. "I chose something challenging because I believe you are capable of more than you think you are." Sarah took the sheet music with trembling hands. She recognized the piece immediately. It was one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written. Even advanced students struggled with it. She had played it before, many times actually, but Professor Williams did not know that. "Professor," she said, looking at the music, "this piece is extremely difficult. I think there might be a mistake. This is graduate-level repertoire. I do not make mistakes with music assignments," he replied. "You have 6 weeks to prepare. I suggest you start practicing immediately. You can use any of the practice rooms in the building. I will even help you find a piano teacher if you need one." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She folded the sheet music and put it in her backpack. "Sarah," Professor Williams said as she turned to leave, "I know this seems scary right now, but sometimes we have to be pushed to discover what we are truly capable of. You might surprise yourself." She nodded again and walked out of the classroom. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took deep breaths. Students were walking past her, laughing and talking about their lunch plans. She felt completely alone. That evening, Sarah sat in her small dorm room and looked at the sheet music. Her roommate was at the library, so she was alone. She spread the pages out on her desk and studied them carefully. The piece was exactly as difficult as she remembered. It required incredible technical skill and musical sensitivity. The left hand had to play complex accompaniment patterns while the right hand played a beautiful but challenging melody. There were rapid scales, difficult jumps, and sections that required perfect timing. Most students would need months or even years to learn a piece like this. Professor Williams was either testing her to see if she would give up, or he seriously overestimated her abilities. Sarah thought about her options. She could drop out of the music program entirely. She could transfer to a different major. She could try to learn an easier piece and hope the professor would accept it instead. Or she could do what she had been avoiding for 2 years. She could show everyone what she was really capable of. She folded up the sheet music and put it in her backpack. Tomorrow night, she would go down to the basement practice room like always. But this time, instead of playing just for herself and her grandmother's memory, she would start preparing for the most important performance of her life. The scared feeling in her stomach was still there, but underneath it, something else was growing. Something that felt almost like excitement. The faculty meeting happened every Wednesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Professor Williams always looked forward to these meetings because he enjoyed talking about music with his colleagues. Today, he had something particularly interesting to discuss. The meeting room was small and cozy, with old wooden chairs arranged around a long table. Professor Martinez taught advanced piano and had been at the university for 15 years. Professor Johnson specialized in voice and opera. Dr. Chen taught music history and was the department head. There were 6 professors total, and they all knew each other well. Before we discuss the usual business, Professor Williams said as he sat down with his coffee, I want to tell you about something that happened in my theory class yesterday. Professor Martinez looked up from the papers she was grading. What happened? Did one of your students finally ask an intelligent question? The other professors laughed. They all knew that Professor Williams sometimes got frustrated with students who seemed more interested in easy grades than in really learning about music. Actually, it is about the new performance requirement, Professor Williams said. I assigned pieces to all my theory students yesterday. Most of them were excited, but one student tried to get out of it completely. Which student? Dr. Chen asked. As department head, she knew all the students and their academic records. Sarah Chen. No relation to you, Dr. Chen, Professor Williams smiled. She is the quiet girl who always sits in the back corner, gets good grades on written work, but never participates in class discussions. Professor Martinez nodded. I know who you mean. Small girl, always wears the same few sweaters. She has never taken any of my piano classes. I assumed she could not play very well. That is exactly what I thought too, Professor Williams said. So I decided to give her a real challenge. I assigned her Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The room went completely silent. Professor Johnson nearly choked on his coffee. Dr. Chen put down her pen and stared at Professor Williams. You did what? Professor Martinez said, her voice rising. That piece is graduate-level difficulty. It is one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. Even my best advanced students struggle with it. I know exactly how difficult it is, Professor Williams replied calmly. That is why I chose it. Professor Johnson shook his head. Williams, that is cruel. The poor girl will be humiliated. She will probably drop out of the program entirely, or, Professor Williams said, she will rise to the challenge and discover capabilities she did not know she had. Professor Martinez was clearly upset. She had been teaching piano for many years and had seen too many students lose confidence because they were pushed too hard, too fast. This is not about challenging students. This is about setting them up for failure. A theory student who has never performed publicly should start with something simple. Maybe a Bach minuet or a simple Chopin waltz. I disagree, Professor Williams said. I have been watching Sarah for 2 years. She understands music theory better than students who have been playing instruments their whole lives. She analyzes complex pieces with ease. There is something about her relationship with music that goes deeper than what we see on the surface. Dr. Chen leaned forward in her chair. Even if that is true, understanding music and playing it are completely different skills. Just because someone can analyze a Chopin ballade does not mean they can perform it. Besides, Professor Johnson added, the girl comes from a poor family. She probably has never had proper piano lessons. She might not even know how to read music fluently. Professor Williams felt a little less confident than when he started this conversation, but he was not ready to give up his position. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe she will come to me in a few days and ask for an easier piece. But what if I am right? What if there is more to Sarah Chen than any of us realize? Professor Martinez stood up and walked to the window. She was clearly agitated. This is not about being right or wrong. This is about a student's well-being. When she fails to learn this piece, and she will fail, it could destroy her confidence completely. She might never want to touch a piano again. She might also surprise us all, Professor Williams said quietly. The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke. How long does she have to prepare? 6 weeks, like all the other students. 6 weeks to learn one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano, Professor Johnson said. A piece that usually takes months or years to master. Professor Martinez turned back to face the group. I think we should intervene. I think we should reassign her something more appropriate before she wastes weeks trying to learn something. Impossible. What if we wait and see what happens? Dr. Chen suggested. If she comes to us asking for help or wanting to change pieces, we will know Williams made a mistake. But if she does not complain, maybe she knows something we do not. Professor Williams nodded gratefully. That seems fair. But, Dr. Chen continued, looking directly at Professor Williams, if this goes badly, if this girl gets hurt or humiliated because of your decision, you will take full responsibility. I understand, he replied. Professor Martinez sat back down, but she still looked worried. I just do not understand why you would take such a risk with a student's confidence, especially a student who seems fragile already. Because, Professor Williams said, I have learned that sometimes our assumptions about students are completely wrong. Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who seem unremarkable, are the ones with the most to offer. Professor Johnson gathered his papers and prepared to leave. Well, we will know soon enough. 6 weeks is not very long. As the meeting ended and the professors left the room, Professor Martinez stayed behind to talk to Professor Williams privately. I hope you know what you are doing, she said. I have seen too many students give up on music because someone pushed them too hard too fast. I hope I know what I am doing too, Professor Williams admitted. But there is something about Sarah that makes me think she is not what she appears to be. What do you mean? I have noticed things about her in class. The way she listens when I play examples. The way her fingers sometimes move when we analyze difficult passages. The way she understands musical concepts that even performance majors struggle with. Professor Martinez considered this. Even if she has some natural musical ability, that does not mean she can perform. Performance requires years of technical training. You are probably right, Professor Williams said. But what if you are wrong? That evening, Professor Martinez went home to her small house near campus. She lived alone with her two cats and spent most evenings grading student work or preparing lessons. But tonight, she could not concentrate on her usual tasks. She kept thinking about Sarah Chen and the impossible assignment she had been given. She imagined the poor girl sitting in a practice room, staring at music that was far beyond her abilities, feeling overwhelmed and defeated. Maybe she should offer to help. Maybe she should find Sarah and offer some basic piano lessons to at least give her a chance. It would not be enough to master the Chopin piece, but it might save the girl from complete embarrassment. Professor Martinez made a decision. Tomorrow, she would find Sarah and offer her assistance. It was the right thing to do, regardless of what Professor Williams thought about his experiment. But what Professor Martinez did not know was that at that very moment, Sarah Chen was sitting in a basement practice room, playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor with the skill and sensitivity of a professional musician. The professors were about to learn that their assumptions about quiet Sarah Chen were very, very wrong. Sarah's daily routine changed completely after Professor Williams gave her the Chopin piece. She still went to all her classes and did her homework. But now every free moment was spent thinking about the upcoming performance. She carried the sheet music with her everywhere, even though she had already memorized every note. During the day, she was the same quiet student she had always been. She sat in her corner seat and took careful notes. When other students talked about their performance preparations, she listened but never joined the conversation. They discussed their private teachers and practice schedules and performance anxiety. Sarah just nodded and stayed silent. But her nights were different now. Every evening after 9 o'clock, she went down to the basement practice room with a new sense of purpose. Before, she had played for herself and her grandmother's memory. Now, she was playing to prove something, though she was not sure exactly what. The piece Professor Williams had given her was like meeting an old friend. Sarah had first learned it 3 years ago when she was still living at home. Her grandmother had taught it to her during the last months of her life, when she was sick, but still insisted on giving Sarah lessons. This piece tells a story, Grandma Mai had said. her thin fingers guiding Sarah's hands on the old upright piano in their tiny apartment. It starts like a gentle conversation, but it grows into something passionate and powerful. Chopin wrote it when he was thinking about his homeland, about love and loss and hope. Now, sitting alone in the dim basement room, Sarah could hear her grandmother's voice in every phrase. The opening melody was like a question being asked. The middle section was like a storm of emotions. The ending was like finding peace after a long struggle. But Sarah was not just remembering the piece. She was improving it. 3 years ago, she had played it well for a teenager. Now, after 2 years of studying music theory and listening to countless recordings, she understood it in a deeper way. She could hear subtleties in the harmony that she had missed before. She could feel the structure of the piece more clearly each night. She worked on different sections. Monday was for the technical passages, the fast scales and difficult jumps that required perfect timing. Tuesday was for the lyrical sections, where the melody had to sing above the accompaniment. Wednesday was for dynamics, making sure the loud sections were powerful without being harsh, and the soft sections were gentle without being weak. By Thursday of the second week, Sarah realized something that surprised her. She was not just preparing to perform this piece, she was falling in love with it all over again. Every night when she finished practicing, she felt both exhausted and energized. The music was filling something inside her that had been empty for too long. Amar Rodriguez, the night janitor, noticed the change too. Usually when he saw Sarah in the basement, she looked tired and a little sad. Now, she looked focused and alive. One night when he brought her coffee, he lingered outside the practice room door and listened. What he heard made him stop in his tracks. Mr. Rodriguez was not a musician, but he had been working in the music building for 10 years. He had heard thousands of students practice, from beginners playing simple scales to graduate students preparing for recitals. What he heard coming from Sarah's practice room was different. It was not just technically perfect. It was beautiful in a way that made him forget he was supposed to be working. Sarah did not know that Mr. Rodriguez was listening. She was completely absorbed in the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace. Her body moved slightly with the rhythm. Her face showed every emotion that the music contained. This was the real Sarah Chen, the one that nobody at the university had ever seen. When she played, she was not shy or quiet or invisible. She was powerful and expressive and completely in control. The piano responded to her touch like it was an extension of her own body, but even as Sarah rediscovered her love for performing, she was also dealing with new worries. The showcase was only 4 weeks away now, and she was starting to think about what would happen when people found out she could play like this. Her professors would ask questions. They would want to know where she learned to play and why she had been hiding her abilities. Her classmates would treat her differently. Some might be impressed, but others might feel betrayed or jealous. The careful, invisible life she had built for herself would be destroyed. There was also the practical problem of what would happen after the performance. If people knew she was talented, they would expect her to take private lessons and participate in competitions and masterclasses. All of those things cost money that her family did not have. How could she explain that she was good at music, but could not afford to pursue it seriously? Sarah's family called her every Sunday evening. She talked to her parents and her younger brother on a video call from her dorm room. They always asked about her classes and grades, but they never asked about music. They knew she was studying music theory, but to them it seemed like a safe academic subject, like studying literature or history. During the Sunday call 3 weeks before the performance, Sarah almost told them about the upcoming showcase. But when she started to speak, she realized she did not know how to explain the situation without revealing how much she had been hiding from them. "How are your classes going?" her mother asked in Mandarin. "They are going well," Sarah replied. "I have a big project due soon." "What kind of project?" Sarah hesitated. "A presentation about a piece of classical music." It was not exactly a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. Her parents smiled and nodded, proud that their daughter was doing well in school. They had no idea that their quiet, studious daughter was preparing to perform one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. After the call ended, Sarah felt guilty about not telling them the truth, but she also felt protective of the secret world she had created for herself. In the basement practice room, she could be the musician she really was without having to explain or justify or worry about money and expectations. As the third week of preparation began, Sarah made a decision. She would not think about what would happen after the performance. She would not worry about questions or expectations or the future. She would focus only on the music and on honoring her grandmother's memory. Every night in the practice room, she imagined Grandma Mai sitting next to her on the piano bench. She could almost feel her grandmother's presence, guiding her hands and encouraging her to play with confidence and passion. Music is not about being perfect, Grandma Mai used to say. Music is about being honest. Play with your whole heart, and people will hear the truth in your music. Sarah was ready to play with her whole heart. She was ready to tell the truth, even if she was not sure what would happen next. But first, she had to survive 3 more weeks of keeping her secret while preparing for the most important performance of her life. 3 more weeks of being invisible during the day and extraordinary at night. 3 more weeks until everyone would discover that the quiet girl in the back corner was not who they thought she was at all. The day of the showcase arrived on a cold Friday evening in November. Sarah woke up that morning feeling like her stomach was full of butterflies. She had been preparing for this moment for 6 weeks, but now that it was finally here, everything felt surreal. The recital hall where the showcase would take place was the most beautiful room in the music building. It had deep red velvet seats for about 200 people, crystal chandeliers hanging from a high ceiling, and a black grand piano on a wooden stage. Sarah had walked past this room hundreds of times, but she had never imagined herself performing in it. During her morning classes, Sarah found it impossible to concentrate. In music theory, Professor Williams was explaining something about harmonic progressions, but all Sarah could think about was the Chopin piece. Her fingers moved unconsciously on her desk, playing through difficult passages in her mind. "Sarah," Professor Williams said suddenly, "can you tell us about the chord progression in measure 12? Sarah looked up, startled. She had not been listening at all. "I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?" Some of the other students giggled softly. Professor Williams looked at her with concern. "Are you feeling all right? You seem distracted today." "I'm fine," Sarah said quickly. "Just tired." Professor Williams nodded, but he continued to watch her carefully for the rest of class. After the lesson ended, he approached her desk. "Sarah, I know you have your performance tonight. How are you feeling about it?" She gathered her things slowly, trying to think of how to answer. "I'm nervous," she said, which was true. That's completely normal. Even professional musicians get nervous before performances. The important thing is to trust your preparation and try to enjoy the experience. Sarah nodded and hurried out of the classroom. She did not want to have a long conversation about the performance. There was too much that Professor Williams did not know, and she was not ready to explain. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. Sarah ate lunch, but could not taste her food. She tried to study for her other classes, but could not focus on the words in her textbooks. She kept checking the time, watching the hours slowly move toward evening. At 4 o'clock, she decided to go to the recital hall to see how it was being set up for the showcase. When she arrived, she found several faculty members arranging chairs and checking the sound system. The stage looked enormous and intimidating under the bright lights. Professor Martinez was adjusting the piano bench when she noticed Sarah standing at the back of the hall. "Sarah," she called out, "come here for a moment." Sarah walked slowly down the aisle between the red velvet seats. Her footsteps echoed in the large space. "I wanted to talk to you before tonight," Professor Martinez said kindly. "I know Professor Williams gave you a very challenging piece to perform. I want you to know that no one expects perfection from you. We just want to see you try your best." Sarah looked at the piano on the stage. It was a beautiful instrument, much nicer than the old piano in the basement practice room where she had been preparing. "If you feel overwhelmed up there tonight," Professor Martinez continued, "just remember that everyone in the audience wants you to succeed. We are all on your side. Thank you, Sarah said quietly. She wanted to tell Professor Martinez that she appreciated her kindness, but she also wanted to say that she might be more prepared than anyone realized. Instead, she just smiled and left the hall. Back in her dorm room, Sarah tried to rest, but she was too anxious to sleep. Her roommate was at the library studying for an exam, so Sarah was alone with her thoughts. She looked at herself in the mirror and tried to imagine how she would feel in a few hours when everything was over. At 6 o'clock, Sarah got dressed for the performance. She had only one nice outfit, a simple black dress that she had bought at a thrift store for job interviews. It was not fancy, but it was appropriate and it fit her well. She brushed her long black hair and tied it back neatly. As she was getting ready, Sarah thought about her grandmother. Grandma Mai had always told her that performing music was like having a conversation with the audience. You are not showing off, she used to say. You are sharing something beautiful. You are giving people a gift. At 7 o'clock, people began arriving at the recital hall. Sarah peeked through a window and watched students, faculty members, and parents finding their seats. Some of the performers were warming up in practice rooms nearby. She could hear scales and vocal exercises coming from different directions. The showcase would feature 12 performances total. There were singers, violinists, a flute player, and several pianists. Sarah was scheduled to perform last, which Professor Williams had said would give her time to get comfortable watching the other students. But being last also meant that she would have to sit through 11 other performances while getting more and more nervous. She found a quiet corner backstage where she could listen to the other students without being seen. The first performer was Lisa, who sang an aria from an Italian opera. Her voice was strong and clear, and she moved gracefully across the stage. The audience applauded enthusiastically when she finished. Next was Michael on violin, playing a piece by Bach. His technique was excellent, though Sarah noticed a few small intonation problems that probably only other musicians would hear. As each student performed, Sarah felt her nervousness growing. These were all good musicians who had been training seriously for years. Most of them had private teachers and years of performance experience. They looked confident and comfortable on stage. When the 11th performer finished, Sarah knew it was almost her turn. She stood up and walked toward the stage entrance, her heart beating so fast that she could hear it in her ears. Professor Williams appeared beside her. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Remember," he said, "this piece is challenging for a reason. I chose it because I believe you can handle it. Trust yourself." He walked onto the stage to introduce her. Sarah listened from the wings as he spoke to the audience. "Our final performer tonight is Sarah Chen, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. This is one of the most technically and musically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire, and we are excited to hear Sarah's interpretation." There was a murmur from the audience. Sarah could hear people whispering, probably wondering who this unknown student was and why she had been given such a difficult piece. Professor Williams gestured for her to come onto the stage. Sarah took a deep breath and walked out into the bright lights. The audience was larger than she had expected. Every seat seemed to be filled, and people were even standing at the back of the hall. She could see her professors in the front row, looking at her with expressions of curiosity and concern. Sarah walked to the piano bench and sat down. She adjusted the bench height slightly and placed her hands on the keys. The piano was perfectly in tune and had a beautiful, rich tone. For a moment, she sat perfectly still, gathering her thoughts and calming her breathing. The audience was completely quiet, waiting for her to begin. Sarah thought about her grandmother one more time. She thought about all the hours they had spent together at the old upright piano, learning not just how to play notes but how to make music that told a story and touched people's hearts. Then she began to play, and everything else in the world disappeared. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade came from Sarah's fingers like a gentle whisper. The opening melody was soft and questioning, like someone beginning to tell a story they were not sure anyone wanted to hear. But there was something special about the way Sarah played those first few measures that made everyone in the audience lean forward slightly in their seats. Professor Williams, sitting in the front row, felt his breath catch in his throat. The sound coming from the piano was not what he had expected at all. Sarah's touch was confident and sensitive, her timing was perfect, and there was a maturity in her musical expression that seemed impossible for someone so young and inexperienced. Professor Martinez, sitting beside him, had the same shocked expression on her face. She had been preparing herself to watch a train wreck, to see a poor student struggle through a piece that was far beyond her abilities. Instead, she was hearing music that was sophisticated and beautiful. As Sarah continued playing, the opening theme developed and grew more complex. Her left hand played the accompaniment with perfect independence from her right hand. The different voices in the music were clear and balanced. Every note was placed exactly where it needed to be, with just the right amount of weight and expression. In the audience, people who had been expecting to hear a struggling student began to realize that something extraordinary was happening. Parents who had come to support their own children stopped thinking about anything else and focused completely on the music. Students who had been checking their phones put them away and listened with their full attention. Sarah was completely absorbed in the performance. The stage lights, the audience, even her own nervousness had all disappeared. There was only the music and the piano and the story she was telling through Chopin's notes. Her body moved naturally with the rhythm and phrasing, never in an exaggerated way, but with the small, graceful movements of someone who was completely connected to what she was playing. The piece moved into its first dramatic section, where the melody became more passionate and urgent. Sarah's hands flew across the keys, playing rapid scales and complex rhythmic patterns with ease. The technical difficulties that usually made students struggle seemed effortless under her fingers. Professor Johnson, who taught voice, found himself thinking about the way Sarah shaped each musical phrase. It reminded him of the best singers he had worked with, the ones who understood that music was about communication, not just hitting the right notes at the right time. Dr. Chen, the department head, was taking mental notes about everything she was witnessing. In her 15 years of teaching, she had seen many talented students, but she had never seen someone hide their abilities so completely. Sarah had been in the program for 2 years, and no one had suspected that she could play like this. As the ballade continued, Sarah navigated through the piece's most challenging passages with remarkable skill. There was a section where the left hand had to play a complex accompaniment pattern while the right hand played a soaring melody high on the keyboard. Many professional pianists found this section difficult, but Sarah played it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The audience was completely silent now, not because they were bored or confused, but because they were mesmerized. Even people who did not know anything about classical music could tell that they were hearing something special. The music was speaking to them in a language that did not require any technical knowledge to understand. Sarah reached the climax of the piece, where all the themes came together in a powerful, dramatic statement. Her playing became more forceful without ever becoming harsh. The piano sang under her hands, filling the recital hall with rich, complex harmonies. The sound was so full and beautiful that it seemed impossible that it was coming from just one person and one instrument. Mr. Rodriguez, the night janitor, was standing at the very back of the hall. He had finished his work early so he could listen to the showcase. When he heard Sarah playing, he smiled to himself. He had known all along that there was something special about the quiet girl who practiced in the basement every night. Now, everyone else was finding out too. As the piece moved toward its ending, Sarah's playing became more gentle and reflective. The music seemed to be looking back on everything that had happened, finding peace and resolution after all the drama and passion. Her touch on the keys became lighter, but every note was still perfectly clear and expressive. The final section of the ballade required Sarah to play very soft, delicate passages that gradually built to a powerful conclusion. This was one of the most difficult parts of the piece because it required perfect control and timing. Sarah played it with such sensitivity and skill that several people in the audience found themselves holding their breath. Professor Williams was no longer thinking about whether he had made the right choice in assigning this piece to Sarah. He was simply amazed by what he was hearing. The student he had thought was shy and untalented was revealing herself to be one of the most gifted musicians he had ever encountered. As Sarah approached the final measures of the piece, the entire audience seemed to sense that something remarkable was coming to an end. The last few phrases were like a conversation between different voices, each one saying goodbye in its own way. Sarah's hands moved across the keys with grace and confidence, bringing the story to its perfect conclusion. The final chord rang out in the silent hall, clear and powerful and beautiful. Sarah held it for exactly the right amount of time, letting it fade naturally into silence. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and sat perfectly still for a moment, as if she was returning to the world from a place where only music existed. For several seconds, no one in the audience moved or made a sound. The silence was not empty or awkward. It was full of the music that had just ended and the emotions that Sarah had shared with everyone in the room. Then, slowly at first, the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then spread to others, and within moments, the entire audience was applauding enthusiastically. People were standing up, their faces showing amazement and appreciation for what they had just experienced. Sarah stood up from the piano bench and faced the audience for the first time since she had begun playing. The stage lights were bright in her eyes, but she could see the expressions on people's faces. They were looking at her with respect and admiration, as if they were seeing her for the first time. She bowed gracefully, the way her grandmother had taught her years ago. The applause continued, getting louder instead of fading away. Some people were whistling and calling out words of praise. As Sarah straightened up from her bow, she looked directly at Professor Williams in the front row. His face showed a mixture of shock, admiration, and perhaps a little embarrassment. He was clapping as enthusiastically as everyone else, but his expression said that he was still trying to understand what had just happened. Sarah smiled at him, a small, quiet smile that held no anger or resentment. Then she bowed once more to the audience and walked off the stage, leaving behind a room full of people who would never think of her in the same way again. The applause seemed to go on forever. Sarah stood in the wings backstage, listening to the sound of 200 people clapping and cheering for her performance. Her heart was still beating fast, but now it was from excitement rather than nervousness. She had done it. She had played the piece perfectly, and people had responded exactly the way her grandmother had always said they would when music was played with honesty and passion. But even as Sarah felt proud of her performance, she also felt scared about what would happen next. For 2 years, she had been able to hide who she really was. Now, that secret was completely out in the open. Everyone knew that she was not the quiet, unremarkable theory student they had thought she was. The applause finally began to fade, and Sarah heard Professor Williams speaking to the audience again. "Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes tonight's showcase. Thank you all for coming to support our students. There will be a reception in the lobby where you can meet the performers and enjoy some refreshments." Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the stage door that led to the lobby. She knew she could not avoid the reception. People would be looking for her, wanting to talk to her about her performance. She had to face whatever was going to happen next. As soon as she entered the lobby, she was surrounded by people, students, faculty members, and parents all wanted to congratulate her and ask her questions. The attention was overwhelming, but everyone seemed genuinely impressed and excited about what they had heard. "Sarah, that was incredible," said Lisa, the soprano who had performed first in the showcase. "I had no idea you could play like that. Where did you study piano?" Before Sarah could answer, Michael joined the conversation. "Seriously, that was professional level playing. You sounded like someone who has been performing for years." Sarah smiled and thanked them, but she was not sure how to answer their questions. She was saved temporarily when Dr. Chen, the department head, approached. "Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Dr. Chen asked. Sarah followed her to a quieter corner of the lobby. Dr. Chen's expression was serious, but not unkind. "That was an extraordinary performance," Dr. Chen said, "but I think you and I need to have a conversation about why you have been hiding your abilities for 2 years. "I can explain," Sarah began, but Dr. Chen held up her hand. "Not here. Not tonight." Come to my office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. We have a lot to discuss." Sarah nodded and Dr. Chen walked away. Before Sarah could process what had just happened, she found herself face to face with Professor Williams. His expression was complex, showing amazement, confusion, and perhaps a little embarrassment. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "You do not need to apologize," Sarah replied. "You gave me an opportunity to play music that I love, but I assigned you that piece because I thought it would be impossible for you. I thought it would teach you humility. I had no idea that you could play like that." Sarah looked at her professor, this man who had unknowingly forced her to reveal her secret. She realized that she was not angry with him. If anything, she was grateful. "Professor Williams," she said, "if you had not given me this assignment, I might have kept hiding forever. Maybe this needed to happen." Before he could respond, Professor Martinez appeared at Sarah's side. Her face was full of emotion, and Sarah could see tears in her eyes. "My dear girl," Professor Martinez said, taking Sarah's hands in hers, "that was one of the most beautiful performances I have ever heard. But why did you let me think you could not play? I was so worried about you." Sarah felt her own eyes getting wet. Professor Martinez had been the one person who had tried to protect her, and Sarah had let her worry unnecessarily. "I am sorry, I did not tell you the truth," Sarah said. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" Sarah looked around the lobby at all the people who were still talking excitedly about the showcase. She saw parents congratulating their children, students discussing the performances, faculty members looking pleased with how the evening had gone. "Scared of this," Sarah said. "Scared of people having expectations that I cannot meet." Professor Martinez squeezed Sarah's hands gently. "Sweetheart, after what I heard tonight, I think you can meet any expectations that anyone might have." As the reception continued, more and more people approached Sarah. Parents of other students wanted to know where she studied and who her teacher was. Some of them asked if she gave private lessons or if she was planning to pursue performance professionally. Sarah answered their questions as honestly as she could, but each conversation made her feel more overwhelmed. She was not prepared for this level of attention and interest. She had spent so long being invisible that being the center of attention felt strange and uncomfortable. Finally, when the reception was winding down and most people had left, Sarah found herself alone with Mr. Rodriguez, the night janitor who had been so kind to her during her evening practice sessions. "I knew you were special," he said with a warm smile. "I heard you playing in the basement many times. I always wondered why you kept it such a secret." "You never said anything," Sarah replied. "It was not my place to say anything, but I am glad that everyone finally got to hear what I have been hearing all along." As Sarah walked back to her dorm room that night, she felt like her whole world had changed in the space of a few hours. Tomorrow, she would have to deal with the consequences of her performance. She would have to meet with Dr. Chen and probably answer difficult questions about why she had hidden her abilities. But tonight, she just wanted to think about the music. She wanted to remember the feeling of sitting at that beautiful grand piano, playing the piece her grandmother had taught her, sharing something beautiful with a room full of people who appreciated it. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt like she did not have to hide who she really was. It was scary, but it was also a relief. She was still not sure what would happen next, but she knew that she could not go back to being invisible. The quiet girl in the back corner of the music theory classroom was gone forever. In her place was Sarah Chen, pianist, who had just given the performance of her life and changed everything for herself and everyone who heard her play. When Sarah got back to her dorm room, her roommate was waiting for her with an excited expression. "I heard about your performance," her roommate said. "Everyone is talking about it. I cannot believe you never told me you could play piano like that." Sarah smiled and sat down on her bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new questions. But tonight, she was just happy to have finally told the truth through her music. She looked at her phone and saw that she had several missed calls from her family. They must have heard about the showcase somehow. Soon, she would have to explain to them what had happened and why she had kept her musical abilities secret for so long. but all of that could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, Sarah just wanted to go to sleep and dream about the moment when the last note of the ballad had faded into silence and the audience had erupted in applause for the girl they had never really known. Monday morning came too quickly for Sarah. She had spent the weekend fielding phone calls from her family and answering messages from classmates who wanted to know more about her performance. The news had somehow reached her parents, who were confused and excited and full of questions that Sarah was not ready to answer completely. At exactly 9 o'clock, Sarah knocked on Dr. Chen's office door. The department head's office was filled with books about music history and framed photos of famous musicians who had visited the university over the years. "Come in, Sarah," Dr. Chen said warmly. "Please, sit down." Sarah took a seat in the comfortable chair across from Dr. Chen's desk. She had prepared herself for this conversation, but she still felt nervous about what the department head might say. "First," Dr. Chen began, "I want you to know that your performance on Friday night was exceptional. In my 15 years as department head, I have rarely heard a student performance of that caliber." "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "But that brings us to the question that everyone is asking. How is it possible that you have been in our program for 2 years without anyone knowing about your abilities? Your academic records show that you have never taken a single piano class." Sarah took a deep breath. She had decided over the weekend that she would tell the complete truth, no matter how difficult it might be. "I learned to play piano from my grandmother when I was a child," she began. "She was a concert pianist in China before she got married and moved to America. She taught me from the time I was 4 years old until she died 2 years ago." Dr. Chen listened carefully, her expression showing both understanding and concern. "When my family came to America, we were very poor," Sarah continued. "My parents wanted me to study something practical that would help me get a good job. They thought music was a luxury that poor families could not afford. But you chose to major in music anyway." "I chose music theory because I thought I could study music without having to perform. I was afraid that if people knew I could play, they would expect me to take private lessons and participate in competitions and recitals. My family cannot afford those things." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "So you have been practicing secretly this whole time?" "Every night in the basement practice rooms." Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor, knew, but he never said anything. "I thought I could graduate with a music theory degree and maybe teach music in a public school someday. I never planned for anyone to hear me play until Professor Williams assigned you the Chopin piece." Sarah smiled slightly. "I was terrified when he gave me that assignment. But I also realized that I could not keep hiding forever. My grandmother always told me that music was meant to be shared." Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. Sarah waited nervously for her response. "Sarah," Dr. Chen finally said, "what you have told me makes your performance even more remarkable than I originally thought. You have been essentially self-taught for the past 2 years, practicing on old pianos in basement rooms, with no guidance from professional teachers. And yet, you played at a level that most of our graduate students would envy. My grandmother was a very good teacher. She must have been extraordinary. But Sarah, we need to talk about your future. You cannot continue to hide your abilities now that everyone knows about them. And frankly, it would be a waste of your talent if you did." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. "I know you have financial concerns," Dr. Chen continued, "but I want you to know that we have options for students in your situation." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, there was a knock on the office door. Dr. Chen called for the person to come in, and Professor Martinez entered the room. "I hope I am not interrupting," Professor Martinez said, "but I wanted to speak with Sarah about her future as well." "Actually, your timing is perfect," Dr. Chen replied. "Professor Martinez and I have been discussing Sarah's situation, and we have a proposal for her." Sarah looked back and forth between the two professors, not sure what to expect. Professor Martinez sat down in the chair next to Sarah. "After your performance on Friday night, the entire faculty met to discuss your case. We all agree that you have exceptional talent that needs to be nurtured properly. We would like to offer you a full scholarship for the remainder of your time." Here, Dr. Chen said. This would cover not only your tuition, but also private piano lessons with Professor Martinez. Sarah felt like she could not breathe. A full scholarship. In addition, Professor Martinez added, we would like to offer you a position as a teaching assistant. You would help with some of the beginning music theory classes, which would provide you with a small income and valuable teaching experience. Sarah stared at both professors, trying to process what they were telling her. But why would you do this for me? Because talent like yours is rare, Dr. Chen said. It would be irresponsible of us to let you continue struggling alone when we have the resources to help you succeed. There is one condition, Professor Martinez said gently. You have to promise us that you will never hide your abilities again. We want you to participate fully in the performance program. We want you to compete in competitions and play in masterclasses and recitals. Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Everything she had been afraid of was being offered to her as a gift rather than a burden. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Dr. Chen replied with a smile. That afternoon, Sarah called her family to tell them about the scholarship offer. Her parents were amazed and proud, though they still did not completely understand how their quiet daughter had become such an accomplished musician without them knowing. Grandma always said you were special, her mother said during their video call. I think she would be very proud of you today. Sarah spent the rest of the week meeting with her new private teacher, Professor Martinez, and beginning her work as a teaching assistant. It felt strange to be helping other students with music theory when just a week ago she had been hiding in the back of the classroom herself. Professor Williams approached her after class on Thursday. Sarah, he said, I want to thank you for teaching me something important. What did I teach you? That our assumptions about students are often completely wrong. I assigned you that piece because I thought you needed to learn humility. Instead, you taught me humility. Sarah smiled. Maybe we both learned something we needed to know. 6 months later, Sarah performed as a soloist with the university orchestra. The piece was Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23, and the performance was even more successful than her debut with the Chopin Ballade. This time, she was not nervous at all. She walked onto the stage with confidence, knowing that she belonged there. The audience that night were her parents, who had flown in to hear their daughter perform. They still did not completely understand classical music, but they could see the joy on Sarah's face when she played, and that was enough for them. Also in the audience was Mr. Rodriguez, the night janitor who had first heard Sarah playing in the basement. He had been given a special invitation and a front row seat. When Sarah finished the concerto and the audience erupted in applause, he wiped tears from his eyes and clapped louder than anyone else. After the performance, Sarah found Professor Williams in the reception area. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For forcing me to stop hiding. For giving me a chance to become who I was meant to be. Professor Williams shook his head. I did not give you anything, Sarah. I just helped you find what was already there. That night, as Sarah walked back to her dorm room, she thought about her grandmother. She imagined Grandma Mai watching from somewhere, proud that her granddaughter had finally found the courage to share her gift with the world. The quiet girl who used to sit in the back corner of the classroom was gone forever. In her place was Sarah Chen, pianist and teacher, who had learned that hiding your talents does not protect you from the world. It only prevents the world from receiving the gifts you were meant to share. Sarah had finally found her voice, and it was more beautiful than anyone had ever imagined.